Hello adventurers, welcome back to the tavern. Today we will be talking about how to make fantasy towns and villages that your players will fall in love with. Whether it's a clandestine druid grove or a bustling trade hub, at some point your players are going to interact with some kind of community or town at some point on their adventure. This is the easiest place for social encounters, quest starts, the home of patrons, and the place that everyone loves, of course, the tavern. Creating an authentic and memorable place can be challenging, especially when you have a party of instigators that are looking to get into the next quest. There are a few tips that we can take from real urban design, but we can add in a fantasy flair to take our town to the next level. So, let's jump into today's topic. Let's begin by thinking about why a town would get established in the first place. Usually, people are going to congregate in places with resources, like food and water. So, we know our town is going to want a steady supply of fresh water, which of course can be accomplished by wells if you don't want a river nearby. Another reason some towns pop up is because there's a valuable resource or a good building material nearby. Maybe your fantasy town is the only exporter of a rare mineral that, when forged into weapons, give them some kind of magical bonus. Sometimes places get settled just because they're a good middle point between two other places. This is especially helpful if you're on a navigable river or an ocean. This usually results in a trade hub. All of this can inform the why. But what we want is a strong theme that can range from the seat of dwarven nobility to a rum-soaked pirate town. I find that a theme really sells a city, and keeping it in mind when you design shops and NPCs will really help it feel authentic. Let's look at an example. The city of Vollenrude was the main hub of the first arc of my last long-form campaign. It's a city in the far north, and one of the few places left on the continent that hasn't been conquered by the Sindarian Empire to the south. This is the capital of a fairly modest region of northern archipelagos and fishing towns. The themes are very heavily Nordic inspired, but also this city was founded by Dragonborn, a species of dragon-esque folk. This means it's a very proud and noble city, still ruled by a monarch and attached to the old ways. Its place in the world makes it extremely remote, and to keep the empire at bay, they pay a yearly tithe and throw a festival to celebrate it. All of the towns in the region are port towns of some kind, or have some kind of port nearby, so there's a lot of nautical theming throughout. These few sentences have sowed many different small themes throughout that'll make a town feel more lived in, and will permeate NPCs' lives. First, the players will be seeing more Dragonborn around them than any other species, so that will raise some questions immediately. But maybe this proud heritage will result in some dragon-themed names of places. For example, the main tavern in this town is named the Wyvern's Nest, and the magic item shop was called the Horde. All of this lended to the themes that I wanted to present while my players shopped, picked up quests, and drank at the tavern. Themes like ancestry, nobility, pride, and of course dragons were on display for anyone that wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the settlement they found themselves in. Next, I'd like to talk a little bit about organizations and guilds. While not necessary to any setting, really, this is a place that the game side of the question can be answered. An organization is a group that your players can be a part of or do business with, but you can use them to pick up quests, gain money, or resources. Maybe there's a local group of monster hunters that will give your players quests for cash. Maybe the same monster hunters guild has a deeper story about finding the beasts that killed the guildmaster's son. But it turns out it was a curse of lycanthropy, and now the guildmaster's son is the monster. These types of groups and locations can be a good place to stage an entire arc of a campaign, depending on the player interest level, of course. It's also a great tool to give a player a little backstory substance when they're creating their character. Being part of the same Monster Hunters Guild could be a good explanation as to why a character starts at level 3 instead of level 1. It also gives you a great place to draw NPCs from. The guildmaster of an alchemical society will be a very different character than the leader of a mercenary company that's acting as the city watch. All of these stories can be equally as interesting though, and is usually a great way to get players started in a new town. The classic example of a story placed in a setting like this is the magical school. You can have an organization with a set path to graduation, but then have a deeper story that permeates throughout each school year. I try to include at least one guild or organization in every town that I make, just to give conversations with certain officials a little more substance, making reference to guild leaders and their influence over the town. Maybe your players are asking about work in the city, and when asking, there are several different answers, but the most common one is that there is a local artisans guild that's always looking for suppliers and contractors. Not only will this push your players towards your written organization, but it'll also make it feel like they're a more integral part of your town. Let's dive a little deeper into places of interest. I like to have a few of these in every town, but of course it always starts with the same place. An inn/tavern, and at least a general supply, but usually a magic shop of some kind as well. This can feel like a bit of a trope that every town has a tavern and a magic shop, but I find they're the best place to enforce your theme, as they're likely the only place that your players are going to ask about without further prompting. I also like to include any places that they're likely to visit, like a main government building, a castle, barracks, prison, etc. Most adventures end up either working with or against a town guard, so keep that in mind and give it some thought. Some of the greatest TTRPG adventures start with a prison break, so think of a prison for them to break out of, especially if your characters are a bunch of criminals. This also includes any places that are relevant to my characters' backstories. For example, one of my players' characters worked at the library in Vollenrud, the town we discussed earlier. So I made a location called the Great Drakarian Library, and wrote in that this was a place that the royal family had created for the preservation of knowledge. I also wrote a character that was the royal appointed head librarian and was a distant cousin to the king. This library ended up being a revisited location throughout the campaign, and ended up being very important to the players. Making memorable places of interest can be a bit of a challenge, especially if you go to all that effort and it falls flat, or even worse, your players don't visit it at all. My recommendation, as always, will be if you spend your valuable prep time on a place, make it relevant to the story in some way. Put an important NPC meeting or the magic MacGuffin that they've been looking for in the place of interest. Next, let's talk a little bit about maps. There are many ways to design your town map, and it's not even required, really. You could describe a town entirely in theater of the mind, but I think a map that your players can follow along with adds a lot to a setting. I have done both hand-drawn as well as digital maps in the past, but I'll highlight a few tools that I like to use. First, I cannot recommend enough the tools Wonderdraft and Dungeon Draft, two pieces of software that are a one-time purchase and make excellent regional, world, and even battle maps in the case of Dungeon Draft. I tend to lean towards digital tools more recently, especially now that I'm playing less in person. The first digital tool that I used before I picked up Wonderdraft was a subscription service website called Incarnate, which I shared with another DM, which you have to continuously pay for the service, but the main difference that I saw was the amount of stamps, tokens, brushes, etc. that you had available to you. With Incarnate, you'll be getting a massive library of assets, but keep in mind that you'll have to continue paying for it if you want to edit any maps that you've already created. This was the main reason that I switched to Wonderdraft not too long ago. If you're a little nervous about making a good map with a lot of detail, you can lean into what I call the district map style. Instead of seeing every individual building, you see roads with blocks and lines of color that indicate different areas of the city. Things like the Port District and the Upper City as a couple of examples. I usually still like to give locations and mark points of interest on my map, like the tavern is in the Brewer's Quarter, or the magic shop is located in the Market District. But this can be a good way to get a good working map on the table without having to think of where every building is located on every street. Finally, I want to mention a nuance that often gets overlooked at a lot of tables. That is your town's continuity with the rest of your setting. Let me give you an example of bad continuity. While adventuring through a post-apocalyptic wasteland of warring tribal villages, the players stumble across a technologically advanced city of wizards. Now, this could be a fun plot hook, where maybe the city is unwilling to share with the outside world, but it doesn't make much sense in a vacuum. If this type of technology and prosperity existed, there'd be a lot less Mad Max going around the rest of the world. I'm not saying that breaking the mold is a bad thing, especially in the context of a secret society that doesn't want the rest of the world to know about them. Keep to your setting, and if you're going to break the rules, give a good reason. Maybe in the same post-apocalyptic setting, you have a secret druid grove that has become a settlement, and is thriving on magical sustenance rather than having to scavenge for their survival. And they'd like to share with everyone, but they've been forced to relocate in the past, so they're very selective of who they let into their town. Here, this place stands in stark contrast to the world around it, but actually amplifies the themes of the setting instead of just feeling out of place. To sum up, your players are probably looking for an authentic experience, but trust you as their GM to make something that they're going to enjoy. So don't worry too much about the finer details. If you make a tavern that you think that your players are going to enjoy, and spend time writing it so that you think it'll be fun, it probably will be. If you want to take things a step further though, follow the steps that I've laid out. Choose a theme and stick to it. Create some organizations or guilds for your players to interact with. Set everything in a few strong places of interest with memorable NPCs. Give them a map to follow along with, and keep it authentic to your setting. If you follow these steps, I have no doubt that your players will be talking about your towns and cities with fond memories for a long time. I have been your tavern keeper, and I hope to see you back in the tavern again soon. Stay safe, adventurer.